You thought I forgot.
Hey guys.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the mess we're in, the show where we talk about what's been happening in the gender wars. Very good week this week. Did you notice?
Yes.
I mean, extraordinary stuff. A lot of extraordinary stuff is happening. The new head of the EHRC stood up for women's rights, which is amazing. People are starting to use sex over gender in the Solicitors Regulation Authority and the Bar Standards Board. Sorry, I'm basically just reading out a post I sent out this morning that JL, nearly said her name, did. Ofsted are to investigate a school over breast binding advice, which is great. Single-sex toilets to be installed in all new public buildings. And the last one, J.K. Rowling still going strong. And we have Tonya Antoniazzi.
The MP for Gower. Excellent.
Who stood up and talked about the importance of sexually accurate data. And the best thing of all, which we should start with, is how Stonewall got an absolute kicking.
Didn't they just?
From the University of Essex, wasn't it?
Yes, it was from the report that came out about was it Joe Phoenix?
Yes.
And it was really quite damning, wasn't it? The condemnation. It just almost just went on and on about it, even to the extent of saying they're representing the law as they would like it to be rather than as it is. Yes. Fake it till you make it, I think, is Stonewall's mantra there.
Yeah, and we're going to be speaking to her name has just jumped out of my head.
Katie Alcock.
Katie Alcock today, who like Helen Watts was thrown out of Girlguiding for questioning the advice from Stonewall. And I noticed just as we were about to go on that Girlguiding have released a statement and they're doubling down. They're basically, they're saying, because, Katie will explain better. Let's leave that for Katie. But the thing that many people have been pointing out, I think Maya pointed it out, and so did Legal Feminist, is that this is a real warning to other institutions that are following Stonewall law. They are really opening themselves up to all sorts of legal challenges,
I think so. I actually think that was an incredibly important thing to have written down in a report that people can refer to, because they have seen it, and it is very damning. It's very poor, and just I think another thing that was said was that Stonewall had appeared to give the impression to members of the faculty that you were free to exclude women with these views. And I think a really important point is a point that I made to Twitter in one of my appeals many months ago, was the fact that this is indirect sex discrimination, because of course it affects women far more than it does men. And I think that's a really important point to make, and we should reiterate it again and again and again, that this is indirect sex discrimination. I think that phrase is quite a key one to just keep on using, because we know that slogans work. So I think we should pick this one up and run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Artie, have you seen any good news this week? What have you been?
Well, I mean, all the good news has been coming out of the UK.
Right. It's still pretty entrenched in Canada.
Yeah, Canada's not in a good place right now.
I'm so sorry.
No, but people are getting organized. There's just a lot more action on the street. People are starting to take notice, which is great. But yeah, our parliament is just so slow. They're just so mired in their own wokery pokery.
That's also an excellent slogan. Can I go back to the EHRC? Because I noticed that there was a lot of disappointment from some circles, and I want to refer to an open letter written to the EHRC by a sort of an organisation called Consortium for Stronger LGBT plus Communities. And it's very hyperbolic, you know, express your frustration and disappointment. But what's really interesting, you know, poor experiences, particularly stuff for trans people, like people who live in poverty, it doesn't address the actual issues at all. It doesn't address that this is, you know, the EHRC really has to consider a balance of rights. And it seems that there's a huge disappointment that an equality for an organisation for the equal human rights of women, there's huge disappointment that they have actually considered women's human rights as well. But I think it's really key that it isn't being addressed. It's all about, I mean, and I think, and they know they're not addressing it, they're purposefully not addressing it, and they use the really very poor language. It was a kick in the teeth to trans people to see the EHRC appear to put their organisational weight behind a movement that has only contributed to rising hate for trans people in communities, creating a policy environment where it's harder for trans people to access their rights. Now, I think this is really worth thinking about. So they're talking about the gender critical movement, and they're suggesting that the only thing that it has contributed to society is rising hate for trans people. And there is just no mention of women's rights, nothing. There's no thought of women here. And I think that that's so poor. It makes them look extremely, extremely bad. And again, like so much of this, I must say the word dishonest every week in relation to many people. But again, I think it's dishonest. It's dishonest not to address that there are competing rights, and women are human too.
Yeah, I know, it's extraordinary. But the only way they can fight this battle is on this kind of dishonest ground, you know. And I was sorry, if you allow me to ride a little hobby horse just for a second, but that's why Helen Lewis's piece about me in the Atlantic was it was again dishonest. They used 2 links to prove my my inadequacy as a human being, and one was from the Metro, which again paid no attention to the context of her piece and what it was about, cotton sealing and so on, which she would know exactly what that stunt was doing. And the other was to a piece about my ongoing legal problems with Stephanie Hayden, you know, which
that
again,
was shocking. I can't believe that. Just seemed like a deliberately low. Like, what is going on? That's like,
yeah. And I wrote to the Atlantic and I said both of these points are dishonest, you know, for different reasons. And they wrote back and they said, we've examined that and we don't think they are. We think they're fine.
Well,
you know.
See you in 5 years when you're apologizing for everything.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to drag that around to me. Let me say one interesting thing. The interesting thing about this, the dishonest ground that this is all fought on, and I think it would be very sad if this came to pass. I'm writing something about that this week. But one of the weird things about this battle is that most people don't know what's going on. And it's been going on for at least, I mean, if you started with what happened with the women of Wolf in the US and Julie Bindel, it's been going on for at least 15 years, you know? But it's a very odd battle. It's a battle to preserve women's rights. So it's a battle to keep women's rights as they are, that women are protected, that women have single-sex spaces. It's a battle to maintain a status quo that benefits women. And as a result, because it's a battle to maintain a status quo that benefits women, I honestly wonder whether people will even know it happened in a few years. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because like what happened this week? Huge victory for us. The government said they were going to keep toilets being segregated along sex lines. Like, most people will see that and go, oh, yeah, great. You know, yeah, that's how it should be. But they won't realize how much effort, how much labor women were putting into this fight, you know?
That's absolutely right. That will never. In fact, people. We've said this before, and you see it sometimes now. People saying, "Where are the feminists?"
Yeah, exactly. But not only that, but people. Not only the labor, the ordinary women who have to spend too much of their time fighting for rights they should be taking for granted. Like, not only that, but they've lost friendships, they've lost relationships. You know, they've lost people have broken up with people. People have lost. I spoke to someone whose best man doesn't speak to him anymore over this. And I wonder. Sometimes I wonder whether there will be any acknowledgement that anything happened, or will they go on thinking, "Oh no, I was right to break up. I was right to cut off all contact with my best man."
No,
you know what I mean?
Movies about it. It's going to be like Mike Lee is going to do one of those improvisational movies, like Secrets and Lies, where it's like turfs and trans, and they're all going to have to come together and cry.
I was thinking about
Oscars
this.
Will be one.
I was thinking about this the other day. Actually, the problem with covering this stuff in a Mike Lee type thing, especially Mike Lee, because Mike Lee operates from a very realistic point of view. Sometimes individual actors tend to go places I wouldn't agree with, but generally it's shot in a very kind of realistic style. But the problem with this, if you were to set this, for instance, in let's say an LGBT youth group that's completely captured and believes all the gender stuff, it would immediately look fake. Because the positions are so bizarre, it would look like people were exaggerating it, Like Titania Grath, I never really enjoyed Titania, whatever.
McGrath.
McGrath. I never really enjoyed it because it just, I mean, I know he did a very clever thing, and fair play to him for getting so many things right. He actually had Titania say ridiculous things that he did a thread of all the ridiculous things Titania said that actually happened. Fair play to him for that. But as comedy, as a character, I'm not a huge fan of that type of stuff because it just feels like low-hanging fruit. I mean, people saying that.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Artie.
Well, there's that Tracy Ullman sketch about like the woke, the overly woke support group where they're all trying to sort of help each other. And I thought it was hilarious, but that actually happened in real life in my city, in this gay queer theater space where the founder of the organization from 40 years ago, had been deemed cancelable over something recently. And they had to have this roundtable discussion where people were fainting and going into hysterics, talking about how they didn't feel safe. The guy wasn't even there. He was 100 miles away watching it on live cast. And they were just it was just people descending into absolute hysterics,
Is there a record of this?
If I hadn't watched it happen, I'd be listening to you now and thinking, oh, what a load of hyperbole. But I actually believe it. I actually believe that this is true. Because just reading just now that Guardian piece on Demi Lovato, who has just come out as non-binary and as it is obligatory, seemingly has cut their hair because this is what the pop stars are doing now.
And what the Guardian completely believes is a real thing.
But it's the falling over themselves to use the most tortuous language they have said and them, and it's just using this language throughout the article, and it's just dreadful. I mean, you're just looking at it thinking, aren't you embarrassed to write this? Aren't you thinking, like, this is not a story, woman cuts hair, and sadly enough, halfway down the article, you see that, yes, she has in the past had eating disorders and was subject to sexual abuse. So again, none of this is at all a surprise. And the Guardian it's all celebratory as opposed to saying, this is really sad.
Well, there was a Ed Jester who's very good on Twitter on things like statistics and academia. He posted something that showed that the vast majority of kids who have been sent to the Tavistock are either gay or bisexual. So you're talking about same-sex, by far the most kids who have been transitioning are gay and bisexual. And I genuinely think that in years to come, this will be seen as a big a kind of natural disaster to befall the gay community as AIDS was.
That's right. Now, when you were saying before about how, the fight might be, we'll look back and people will forget how hard it was and just sweep it under the rug. That's not going to happen in the gay community. In the gay community, this is a complete fucking reckoning because everything has been ripped apart. All these lesbians who were dating straight men suddenly going, what the hell was I doing? I literally brainwashed myself into dating men. All these gay guys, like my former friend who was letting women sleep with him even though he couldn't stand it because he thought he was obligated to because they said it was supposed to. All of these youth groups that were just cesspits for harming women's self-esteem and grooming and sexual predation, even all of these men with autogynephilia who have been, instead of being given therapy and contextual understanding of what they were going through, just being lured into this magical belief that they're really women that often leads them to, terrible physical and mental health and even death, which also happened to my friend. It's just horrible what's going on in the gay community.
That's really, it's so upsetting.
Yeah.
But just as somebody said about the, I was in response to my Demi Lovato comment, because Halsey also is non-binary, but weirdly, Halsey is pregnant. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? How after announcing that they were non-binary, that Mother Nature didn't say, "All right, hang on, sorry."
Yeah.
It's just insane, isn't it? It's like if she got together with Sam Smith. Like, I'm pretty sure we know which one would be having the baby.
Yes. But that I don't even think that stuff registers to them. They just don't see it as I don't know. I don't the kind of contortions that people can get themselves into are really. Well, here's another one. I just saw today someone posted a private message, I guess, or a message from a dating app where a woman who identifies as a man was trying to, go out with a gay guy, and he was saying, "No, I'm only interested in men," and she says, "Well, I am a man legally," and she didn't take no. She actually didn't take no, and it's just. I think Stonewall. One thing I'd love to see is an investigation into Stonewall. That really, and I think the day might be coming near.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the other thing about this report. I thought it might, this by itself probably won't do it, but if there are many more, then it is possible that at some point, there will be an investigation, and I really think that there should be, like you do, Graham.
Yes, like that's why I used the photograph of Amy Challoner with Ruth Hunt to advertise this episode. Amy, like, again, it's one of those things that we're shouting it from our small platforms, and it's just going to take a while before it really sinks in with people. But I'll say it again, a trans-identified male who is living with two pedophiles, one self-confessed and the other just obviously one, was at the center of Stonewall in the years they were pushing this extremely contentious and, what more and more people are realizing, dangerous philosophy, onto the whole of England, including police forces, schools, the NHS. I think one day that will be seen as the incredible scandal.
Certainly awareness of the issue has increased. It's increasing, and it's increasing. There was that poll that the Daily Mail got hold of and shared, and I thought at first that it was a poll of Daily Mail readers, but it wasn't. It was an actual poll that had been done, and they were just reporting it. And overwhelmingly, at least sort of 50%, and for well, I think it was, should breastfeeding be renamed to chest feeding? I mean, it's a stupid question, but it was like 68% were saying no, and about 10% were saying yes, maybe 15. So it was around 15% for the agreement, and around 50% for the disagreement of all of these issues, toilets, changing rooms, chest feeding. And and because I thought, because when I did that poll back in 2018, and it was actually quite difficult even then to get a company to run the wording of male born person with a penis as opposed to a trans woman. But I think it was I wanted, because people didn't understand what a trans woman was back then. I think they have more of an idea now, but still, the general public still, I think of a transsexual. And it was difficult to run that poll even then. And I was thinking that actually, as time went on, it is possible that if we ran that poll now, there would be fewer people who agreed with, say, our side. But you see polls coming out, and it isn't true. There's core of activists who are really, really pushing it. They have got young people on board, but also I think, as they've also got this transition point where people are getting older, and especially women are having children and thinking, no, my sex materially affects who I am. It actually matters, and the idea that identifying as a woman is why you have been sort of held back, maybe oppressed. It's just such a nonsense idea, isn't it? That if you just change your bloody pronouns, you'd be fine, and there'd be no not having to sort of leave work to have kids, and that won't affect your career. It's just nonsense, and everyone knows it's bloody nonsense, and it doesn't seem to be changing. But what does seem to be changing is that there are more and more people thinking about the issue, which I think is all to the good.
As we know, the hard part has been trying to convince people that it was actually happening. I mean, that's been the hardest thing.
Yeah, people friendly unawares. Yeah,
the friendly unawares. Yeah,
completely. But I don't think anyone can now say that they're unaware of the idea of gender. Like, I remember a friend of mine, despite the fact that I've been banging on about this for 10 years, a friend of mine at work, when we started seeing the word cis being used, he was like, well, what is cis? And this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But today at work, some chap said, oh, I'm a white cis male. And so it's definitely sort of come into the zeitgeist, the idea of gender. But as you say, the friendly unawares are all like, yay, my pronouns, I'm good, and pleasant. And I'm doing it not because I want to shit on women, but because I think it's the right thing to do. But more people have to understand that this is happening in order to then get to a place where they think, oh, hang on, there is another side to it.
Yeah, I think we're going to get there. It's interesting. It just feels like there's a lot of optimism, just taking stock like a year ago today versus today, how the mood has changed and how the news that's coming out is so much more positive. But there's also this sort of, what do you call it? Like, there's people who are at the vanguard who want to be hip. And then when something hip, some fad comes along, and then it reaches the mainstream, and the hipsters want to distance themselves from it because it's passé to them now. You know what I mean? And it feels like gender identity ideology is taking that leap where America is just like the mainstream is just adopting grunge. And then all the grunge people are like, oh my God, we got to get away from grunge. It's like passé now. It's in the mainstream. They're selling it at Kmart, you know?
Exactly. Well, you can see that there are some of the TikToks coming out now from sort of younger kids taking this.
Artie, what's going on?
Oh, is this a fire or something?
Okay, if smoke, I'll tell you if smoke starts appearing in the background.
Oh, it's done. Sorry, it's just my superintendent yelling through the speaker of God. Apartments here, like there's a speaker in your ceiling where they can just talk at you. It's really freaky.
Or like Big Brother, like Big Brother.
But yeah, I feel like to go back to sort of that thing I was saying, like it just feels like right now, it just seems like if you want to consider yourself edgy, it's going to look like you're going to be critical of gender identity ideology now. It's going to become the sort of more intellectual view, maybe. Now that the mainstream is all like Demi Lovato's non-binary, I mean.
The only thing I'd say to that, I mean, I've always had a hope and a belief that the punks will turn up to do what the punks did the previous time.
Save us.
What?
The punks will save us.
The punks will save us, yeah. Because to me, this is almost like a similar. You might look at the history of, or at least modern history, in the West, in the very comfortable West, as being a kind of struggle by the hippies to try and get their point of view accepted as the actual point of view. So you might take all you need is love as a thing that actually gained some currency for a while until people realized, well, actually, no, we need a few other things as well. And it's a similar thing. Like, you notice the way they talk about kids is the same. You got to listen to kids, man. The kids know what's going on and stuff. And it's just a kind of hippie, and no offense to hippies you're watching, a lot of people will identify as hippies in this thing. But I think you can say that in general, these kind of, like, for instance, the hippie years hit a full stop with the Charles Manson murders. They kind of just shocked everyone out of a kind of complacent, well, maybe the kids are kind of onto something with this, and they suddenly realized, oh no, maybe it's a bad idea to let shoeless people wander through your house because they're onto something. I think there's a similar thing going on here, that people are just going to keep it. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Just before you go, there's Nutmeg, R.I.P. Nutmeg, pointed out that 3 men identifying as women turned up. 3 pedophiles in 24 hours have turned up, and one judge said to one of these guys, "Life must be difficult for you." And I won't bother going through the thing of sharing the screen, but it's just a bloke. I won't say he looks like me, because that would be a bad thing to say about a pedophile. But he just looks like a normal bloke.
I have to go in a second, but I just want to address that really quickly. Isn't that shocking? This is somebody who's a repeat offender, sexual offender. This is somebody who's clearly sexually disturbed. And if they suddenly describe having a paraphilia, why doesn't the judge see that this is just a paraphilia? That they're identifying as a woman is just an extension of their sexual dysfunction. I'm not.
But it's not even.
But
But it's not even that, Artie. These are just criminals who are just trying to get away with something.
Yeah, and then, like, life must be so hard. Like, what?
They're just blokes. Maybe their lawyer told them to put on a bit of lipstick before they enter the courtroom. But it's so obvious to anyone who's not a child that this is what's going on.
Exactly.
Well, again, I think I was talking to a friend of mine, because there was an email going around with some new statistics had come out from a GLAD, I think they're called, about for International Day Against Transphobia and Homophobia and Biphobia.
I gotta go, guys. I'm sorry. I gotta run.
Don't worry. Bye, Artie. Bye. Oh, I should have said that Artie has to rush off at 1:30. Okay. I should have said that.
So very quickly, and there were lots of statistics in there, and it was like 8 out of 10 respondents, had been subjected to violence and hate. And there were lots of things, but as a good friend of mine pointed out, once you find yourself using the word respondent, you're knowingly presenting a fiction with your statistics, because respondents is meaningless, because it's clearly a self-selected set of people. But the fact that people are willing to do this, and organizations are willing to do this, you follow through, and yes, it's all self-selection, and you find out that actually only 300 people have actually answered. But it's that use of the word respondent, I think, is a really important one, because they know that this is self-selecting and that it's very, very skewed, but they're doing it anyway. And again, it is to push this narrative that it is, vulnerability, etc. But it is then being picked up, and judges and people like judges are saying, "Oh, life must be very hard for you," because these statistics are just being pushed out there, like the 40% child suicide one, which is I still see, going on. I still see it.
Yeah. Well, let's. That kind of gives me a good segue into our guest. Katie Alcock is waiting to come on, but Katie was a Girlguiding leader. I think I nearly said troop leader, but that might be wrong. Actually, let's bring her in and ask her. Katie, hello. How are you doing?
Not troops.
Not troops. I knew it was wrong. Sorry, what are they? What are they in Girlguiding?
So brownies are in packs, but Girl Guides in general are in units.
Units. Oh, that's so. Oh God, that sounds too neutral. I don't like that. I'd prefer troops. Can you get that changed for me, please, Katie?
No. But scouts are in troops. Guides have to be different.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, units just seems a little unromantic. I don't know, but maybe romance is not the right way to go about naming groups of young girls. Brilliant start for me. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant start to this interview. Katie, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Katie, the reason that I wanted to talk to you was because you used to be a unit leader. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
How old were the girls that you were taking care of?
So I worked with girls from 5, which is rainbow age, through 7 to 10, which is brownie age, and then up to 14, which is at 14 they can become young leaders and help with the younger girls. Yes. So right through the whole age range. There are older girls as well, but that was the age of the girls that I worked with.
Yeah. And you know, is it? I presume it's very you know, fulfilling work.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. It was so it's not just fun, but quite a lot of leaders will say, when do you get a chance to be 8 again? You're an adult now, you're not allowed to be 8, but when you're being a brownie leader, you're allowed to be 8 again. But it was also one of the best ways to meet great female friends. So there's a great bond between women who do guiding.
Yeah. Now, of course, there's as always with stories like this, we're heading to a brick wall, which was the advice that Girlguiding has been given over people who identify as women. I noticed today, Katie, that Girlguiding doubled down on their position on this.
Yes, indeed. So they've been having a series of consultations and focus groups with people in various protected characteristics. So somebody was commenting on Mumsnet that she was in one of the disability groups, and I also know somebody who was in a group for Black and ethnic minorities. They reported that a number of people who were mainly leaders, but I think they may also have done something with parents and girls, had felt not included by Girlguiding. And some of the groups, when I was a leader, I really observed this as well. So the area that I live in, I'm in the north of England. We have a fairly sizable minority of families that are Indian Muslim, but hardly any of them would send their girls to guiding. And this is partly because they don't know much about it, but it's also because the groups don't make much of an effort to reach out to them, and because the meetings are often at inconvenient times for them. So my unit was set up with the aim of helping girls who have barriers to access to contribute, to be able to join. So we met at weekends, which meant that girls who went to mosque school on weekdays, or girls who had other reasons why they couldn't go to a weekday meeting, such as their parents working full-time, so they were in after-school care, so that girls who were in those groups could come to us, and it was successful in doing that. So we had a real mix of girls, including some that would never have been able to go to another unit. And one of the things I discovered, which I hadn't really thought about, was that in families where they're, in larger families, or families where there's a number of girls in the same family and they're from a quite traditional background, they would normally expect their children to all be able to do the same thing together. And there was another unit in Preston, which is about 20 miles from us, which had more or less the same structure. And they found that families were really pleased, not just that their girls could go to something at the weekend, but also that their younger and older girls could go to the things at the same time. And it wasn't a case of this one's for 5-year-olds, this one's for 8-year-olds. So we ran a joint unit which catered for all different ages, and which met, as I say, at the weekends. And it meant that it was more accessible. And we also tried to reach out to communities that don't normally participate in guiding.
And well, this is obviously a inclusive in the best meaning of the word. Word.
That's excellent. Actually,
yeah, sounds great.
Just like impressive and lovely.
But you lost your troop. Can you tell us why?
Yes. So
not troop. Unit. You lost your unit. I'm so sorry.
So I found out, not through Girlguiding bothering to tell us, but through Helen Watts, who's a fellow guider, that Girlguiding had decided that boys who say they identify as girls and men who say they identify as women. So this is not adult men who've gone through a transition process, who've gained a gender recognition certificate and who are now legally female. This is any man or boy, adult or child, who just says that they identify as trans, who says they identify as a girl, can become a leader. Or in the case of a child, they can become a guide. And there were additional deep worries about safeguarding, which were that in particular, these adult men were not being safeguarded in the same way that a man who doesn't identify or doesn't say they identify as a woman.
And can I, sorry, to interrupt Katie, but can I just point out here that the safeguarding rules for men are very stringent, are extremely stringent.
Yes,
with
they are. Yes, so for men and boys, men are not allowed to share sleeping, washing, changing or toilet facilities with women or girls, and boys are not allowed to share any of these facilities with women or girls. So I took my 4-year-old son on camp, and he wasn't allowed to sleep in the same space as me, and he wasn't allowed to use the same toilets as me. He wasn't allowed to use the ladies' toilets. We also had girls' toilets, so there was no issue that the girls themselves would be uncomfortable, but the rules were that he had to use a set of male toilets. He wasn't allowed to share with me. And I went along with those rules because I thought they were there for a good reason, even though he wasn't massively happy about this. He was only 4 after all. Then I discovered that if the same child comes along and says, I identify as a girl, then, I mean, with a 4-year-old, I'm not saying there's an issue with a 4-year-old.
Is probably not an issue.
Adult. So adult men will meet, court and marry a woman in order to have access to her children. That's a huge effort to have access to children to abuse. Coming along to a Girlguiding unit and saying, I now identify as a woman, please can I be a leader? And then potentially sharing a sleeping space or a changing space with girls, because in guiding, leaders can share sleeping spaces with girls. This is not a huge barrier to come along and say, oh, now I identify as a woman. It really is not.
Well, look,
and considering what we know about men in prison and the huge rate of sexual offenders who are saying that they identify as trans, this is not a huge barrier. So this was a huge safeguarding issue that Girlguiding were unwilling to consider might be dangerous. But there were also other safeguarding issues. So at the time that we complained about it, Girlguiding was saying that you could never tell anybody that a child was trans. So a girl could come to you and say, I think I'm trans, I think I identify as a boy, and I'm going to meet somebody off the internet that is also trans, or I'm going to buy a binder which might damage my ribs, or I'm going to buy drugs that I can get off the internet. You can't tell anybody because I've told you I'm trans. You cannot tell anybody. And this is incredibly dangerous. You never, in Safeguarding 101, you do not keep secrets.
And Katie, can I ask as well? Sorry, no, finish your point. Sorry. Another child comes along and the parents don't tell the unit that this child is biologically male. They're quite a young child and nobody's allowed to ask this or tell anybody, or one leader knows this, and that means that one leader and this child have this secret about this child's biological sex. And that is also very, very dangerous, to have one adult know something about a child that other adults or the other children don't know, because they can hold this over that child if they have ill intent. And can I ask as well, if a grown man was to identify as a woman and become a troop leader, would their trans status have to be communicated? Would you be allowed to communicate their trans status to parents?
Well, it wouldn't be an obligation. Obviously, human beings can tell men from women. So if somebody's biologically male, however they dress or whatever they call themselves, then children and adults can tell this. I'm a developmental psychology researcher. I've written a piece about this, and young babies can tell men from women. And so, it's your sexed body that makes a difference to what you look like and how you move and how you talk and what shape your face is. It's not your gender identity. So obviously the children can tell and the parents can tell, but there's no obligation to tell the parents.
But if a parent was found out that a man identifying as a woman was a unit leader, as someone just reminded me, would parents be in trouble? Would they be called transphobic or whatever if they were to complain about this?
Well, parents have complained about the lack of knowledge. That there hasn't been a case of parent complaining about their child's unit leader. And to be fair, there are men that that help with units and are involved in a lot of the running of units. So if you didn't want your daughter to be in a unit where there were male unit helpers do a lot of the unit running, then
Yes.
you would probably look for another unit. And the first step would not be to complain that there's a man in the unit, but to look for another unit. But parents have complained that, for example, they wouldn't be able to find out whether their daughter would have to share with a biologically male child on a residential. So where units go away together, then parents are not told whether their daughter will have a choice or not of sharing a sleeping room with a child that's biologically male. And parents have complained about this and been told, this is the answer, this is inclusivity, you can't complain about this. And when they've brought it up again, then they've been told, we are not talking to you anymore about this issue.
Wow.
That is quite amazing, isn't it? How did it get this far? I mean, because the absolute strictness that point that you made about your 4-year-old son, that is really strict. That's incredibly strict, isn't it? Those are absolute hard and fast rules. And yet there's this loophole, the size of
a truck,
the size of a black hole, just there, and nobody is even allowed to question it. Oh, you can question it once, but
that's what it surprised me today that Girlguiding issued this statement, because they said at one point our policies are in line with the Equality Act, and of course they're not. They're not in line.
No, they're in line with, say, Stonewall and Gendered Intelligence that advised them, and it was a few years ago now. And they are notorious for not communicating things to leaders. And I've known leaders who've had alerts set up to warn them of changes in Girlguiding pages, because otherwise you didn't find anything out. And they told us that they emailed everybody, but it was probably a tiny link to say this has changed without telling us what had changed. And that it's not. There's been a paper out from Essex today saying that Stonewall may want this to be the law, but it is not in fact the law.
Yes.
And that's what's happened.
Yes, that's one thing we were talking about earlier. I mean, I really think that if Girlguiding were to turn around and say, "I'm sorry, we got this wrong, we're going to examine this," they would get a lot of support, but their doubling down is at this stage is really reckless, because what just happened with the University of Essex is going to happen in other organizations, and Girlguiding, I think, is a huge target for some kind of legal action. Don't you think? I mean, it's crazy.
So what happened to you, Katie?
So I discussed in a very small group, so 9 members, I think. I discussed that I didn't think they were in line with the Equality Act. And somebody in the group screenshotted it and sent it to Girlguiding, and they paid somebody vast sums of money to, I don't know if it was vast sums of money, but they paid somebody some money to investigate me and sent me what a lawyer friend has described as a confession to sign. I am a dreadful person, but I will adhere to all rules henceforth. And I said that I would only adhere to Girlguiding regulations if they didn't clash with safeguarding. And I was told this was the wrong answer. And all Girlguiding regulations were equal and safeguarding was not above anything else. And I was expelled. So I appealed, So I was expelled on the grounds of apparently breaching social media guidelines and on the grounds of refusing to adhere to their trans policy. They didn't actually mention their trans policy in this question. They just said, will you adhere to all policies? And I said, only those that don't clash with safeguarding. One of the things that I had problems with was this idea of secrecy around children's trans status. After Helen and I were expelled, they changed this regulation. I think they saw sense, but they didn't give us any credit or let us back in. So then we both appealed, and our expulsions were upheld in both cases. But in my case, they said that I had not breached social media guidelines. The only issue was that I was refusing to uphold all their policies. In other words, the only issue was that I put safeguarding above other policies. I think that they realised that if anything got to court, then one post that 9 people saw would not be seen to be a breach of social media guidelines.
Speaking of getting to court, you have a crowdfunder.
I do. So I have a crowdfunder which is on Crowd Justice. I have sent Graham the link, so I'm hoping he's going to put it somewhere. So it's just launched today. It's actually a relaunch because my case has been going on for a while, but my solicitor has moved firms, so we have to move the page. And because my case rests on my gender critical beliefs, on my beliefs that gender is a system that oppresses women because of their sex, and that people can't change their sex. My case is similar to Maya Forstater's case. And so we are hoping to go to court sometime soon in court terms, which is not that soon. But we are waiting for the outcome of Maya's case to find out what's happening next. But we have already had a couple of back and forths when I was invited to drop my case and I said no thank you. And we had there's been a day in court when I think one solicitor went, or one barrister, I think it was one barrister from my side and like 3 or 4 from the other side, who were all much more expensive than mine. And the court ordered Girlguiding to pay our costs because they thought that they were overspending.
Okay, so
I do need funds, but I won't be using quite as much as Girlguiding are using of their girls subs.
So what is the case? Are you appealing your suspension?
The case is that I was victimised because partly because I raised a whistleblowing issue. That other people would be discriminated against. So not only was I discriminated against because of my beliefs, but also other people would be discriminated against because of their beliefs and because of other protected characteristics. So Girlguiding will allow women to be leaders as long as they identify as women. So adult women who are female, have had no biological changes, no hormone changes, but identify as either men or non-binary cannot be leaders. So they have excluded some categories of women, but also adult leaders who don't identify as women, in other words, who don't have a gender identity, who don't think that everybody has a gender identity, can also not be leaders. And I'm pretty sure that applies to a very large number of leaders, but just nobody's noticed. So it says you have to identify as a woman. Anybody that identifies as a woman, but nobody who doesn't identify as a woman can be a leader. For children, they also changed their policy. They previously said that leaders should be moving on girls who no longer identified as a girl, but they now allow any female child, whether or not she identifies as a girl, to stay. And there are girls that go from, start rainbows when they're 5. I had girls that started with me when they were 5, and by the time my unit closed, they were 11. And they've known me for longer than any of their teachers. And girls who are in that position and who have some difficulties with their identity, they're not quite sure what they want to do, they're not quite sure how they identify. Girls in that position need adults who they've known for a long time to support them and help them through that journey, and however that ends up. But the same is true of younger leaders that have been in the movement since they were 5 and who are going through difficult times and who are struggling with their identity, they also need the support of other leaders. And as I said, it was a great way to meet other women, and it's really, you know, that they should have a duty of care to leaders as well, and not just say, bye, sorry, you now identify as non-binary, so you can't be a leader anymore.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
I think that last point is a really interesting one. I think there is a push in this sort of movement to abolish the idea of women's only spaces, because and they can be so important, so sort of affirming and it's something that women don't very rarely have, is just simply a space where there are only other women. And that is it seems to be such a red flag to a bull, a red, what's it called?
Red rag to a bull.
Yes, red rag to a bull. That they really
hate the idea.
Yes, it just has to go.
Yeah.
Well, I always think it comes from childhood. It's just an annoyance at the clubhouse that's for girls only. Boys just never got over it, that there was something they couldn't.
I wasn't a leader when scouting took girls, but there was a change so that they couldn't have all boy units. And I think that was while I was a leader, or when I was just starting was being discussed. And people said, oh, guiding should take boys, it's not fair, why should there be a girl only? And I said, well, when women earn the same as men and women are not subject to more domestic abuse than men, then I will start making the case for there not to be single sex organisation. But I never dreamed that it would become a mixed sex organisation by stealth.
That's absolutely how to say it.
I mean, I think that I hope any parents watching this will think about taking a legal action themselves, because they don't have a leg to stand on. They are not following the law; they're following Stonewall law, which is being exposed.
And I think you're right, because honestly, nobody wants to wait until something happens. I mean,
that's what's so enraging.
Exactly. Yes. I've got to say, I will say that any male person who goes to such lengths, well, and it isn't even actually a great length.
It's not that great length. It really isn't.
Force themselves into this space is got to be the sort of male person that you absolutely do not want in this space. More than virtually all other male people. And nobody wants to wait until something happens before then actually doing something about it. But this is the position that we're in now. Somebody has to get hurt or worse before something will happen. So good for you for challenging this. I think that
scouting schools, they've all had huge child sex abuse scandals, and guiding hasn't. And this is not entirely unrelated to the fact that most child abusers are male, and that we've hardly had any men in guiding, and the ones that we have had have been segregated and closely supervised.
Yes.
That's an excellent point. Actually, that's a really, really interesting thing. Yes, I can see that. And then, as you say, this is just by stealth. It's appalling, isn't it? And the treatment of you is appalling.
Yeah. And my daughter can't join either. So when I was expelled, my daughter wasn't old enough to join Rainbows, and I was told that I couldn't go along to meetings with her. And she was very young, and the idea was that she would join my unit, and she was expecting that she would become a Rainbow and that she would go to Rainbows with mummy. And so they told me that this wasn't allowed to happen, and she couldn't go with me. I could drop her off, and that would be it. They have, I think, partly due to COVID, because they've had to have every child that's been on a Zoom meeting, they've had to have a parent with them. They have changed this and said that I could go to meetings with her, but I couldn't go to sleepovers. And my son's in scouting, and he's had one of us at all of his sleepovers, and so this is what she expects will happen. And because they're always desperate for parents to come along, and he wanted it, so we went along with it, and she thinks this will happen, so she will not agree to going to a residential without me. And all the other girls could ask their mothers to come with them, and their mothers would be allowed to, but I'm not allowed to.
That's appalling. I mean, that is absolutely appalling.
What I love about this, though, I mean, I really hope a journalist, please send this, anyone who's watching this, please send to all journalists, because I really just do not understand why this is not a huge scandal. But they are treating you like you're a safeguarding risk.
Yes.
The only other parents who can't go on sleepovers are the ones who wouldn't pass a DBS. I've asked them whether they think I wouldn't pass a DBS, but I haven't had an answer.
It's just extraordinary. Really, please, anyone watching, please send it to your favorite journalist or any journalist you have a relationship with. Where do you live, Katie? Where's your local?
I live in Lancaster. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Lancaster, and I study how children learn to think, including how children learn to think about stereotyping.
Well, local papers as well. But get in touch with everyone you can. And Helen Watts, I hope Helen will ramp up her campaign as well to try and bring this to people's attention. I think that, it's so weird. We've been shouting and shouting and shouting. No one's been listening to us. But I do think that we're getting to the stage where this might just penetrate now. I really think so. And I think your case is so important to help that happen. What's more important than the safeguarding of young girls? What's more important?
What a terrible loss to these girls.
Yes.
You've had so much to offer. You're so well qualified, and that you've got a lot of thinking around this. You've got you had a unit where it was very diverse in, as Graham said, the best sense of the word. And what a terrible loss for a generation of girls. And for your daughter, what a terrible loss for her. Because actually, things like guys, they really do. I mean, they stick with you, don't they? They're the making of you.
I mean, that's why I did it, because I was a brownie and a guide as a child. So my new crowdfunding page has a nice picture of me on Brownie Pack Holiday as the header. It's very cute.
Lovely.
Oh, lovely.
Well, I'm going to have to pick up my child now in a second, so I'm going to have to go. But Katie, I only wish you every success with this. I think that this is a very good fight for everybody to start paying attention to, because I don't think anything exposes the woolliness of this ideology more than thinking that a man who identifies as a woman merely through self-declaration is exempt from all safeguarding procedures. It's outrageous. And I think it's clearer than a lot of things in this fight. So
yes,
I wish you all the best, Katie.
Yes,
I'm going to post the hell out of your crowdfunder.
Thank you very much.
And just keep it up. Wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Nice to talk to you too.
What do they say? What do units say when do they salute?
They don't salute.
Oh, for God's sake! I'm getting everything wrong.
And you shake with your left hand, except I presume you do an elbow bump with your left hand because you're not allowed to.
Let's do that. Lovely to talk to you, Katie. Best of luck, and I'm sure you're going to do really well.
Yes,
thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.
Right. Well, I do have to go. So it's a shame we didn't have Hardy for the second half, but he had to rush off and do something. If the week,
a fire by the sounds of it.
Yes, it was just escaped a fire during the show. If there's anything, we might have a special this week because they're always fun to do. So we'll see how we feel later in the week. And in the meantime, lovely to talk to you, Helen. Thank you for...
Yes, you too. And everyone, lovely to have you all in the comments. I've been reading. Again, it's so lovely to have you all around. And like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. And please, let's turn Katie Alcock into a hashtag or something that really gets the word out. I think this is a very, very important one.
I do too. Agreed.
Yeah. All righty. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.